Welcome to the Science of Fiction HFY Galaxy Tales. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and tap the notification bell so you never miss a new story from HFY Galaxy Tales. Where humanity always finds a way. The unlikely reward. The man stood in front of his commanders, waiting for the reward they had promised him. He had fought in countless battles, facing death and hardship, but now, after his victory, he was about to receive his prize. His heart beat faster as the room filled with anticipation. The generals spoke of his bravery, his skill in battle. But the man's mind was elsewhere. He had never cared for rewards, but today, he would get one. And he had no idea what to expect. Then, it happened. A door opened at the far side of the room, and in walked a woman. Her hands were bound with heavy chains, and her feet were shackled. She was an alien, a member of a race that had been captured and enslaved by the Empire. She was tall, her features sharp and striking, but her eyes held a sadness, a deep sorrow that pierced his heart. The generals introduced her as his reward for winning the war. They spoke of her like she was nothing more than an object, a prize to be claimed. The man looked at her, his mind racing. He had fought for freedom, for peace, but now, standing in front of him was a woman in chains. She was a slave, a living being reduced to nothing more than a possession. His stomach twisted, the excitement he had felt for his reward turning into a deep sense of unease. The woman's eyes met his, and for a moment, he saw something more than fear or submission. There was fire in her gaze, a quiet strength that told him she would never bow to anyone, not even him. The general spoke of taking her to his quarters, where she would serve him, obey his commands. But the man could not shake the feeling that this was wrong. She was a person, not a prize. He wasn't sure what it was, but something in him resisted. Something told him he couldn't treat her like an object. He stepped forward, his voice firm. "I will not take her," he said. His words echoed through the room, and for a moment, everyone was silent. The generals looked at him in confusion. "You were promised a reward," one of them said. "This is your prize. Take her and move on." But the man shook his head. His decision made. "I will not take her as a slave," he said. "She is not an object, and I will not treat her as one." He turned to the woman, his eyes meeting hers. She stood there, still and silent, her chains rattling slightly. He could see the fear in her eyes. But also something else, something that made him believe she wasn't just a victim, she was a survivor. The generals exchanged looks, unsure of what to do. They had never faced resistance like this before. They were used to people accepting rewards without question, used to seeing slaves treated as little more than property. "Then what will you do with her?" one of the generals asked. The man's mind raced. He could not leave her here, not to be treated as a prize. "Release her," he said firmly. "She is free to go wherever she wants." The generals hesitated, but after a moment, they relented. The chains were unlocked, and the woman stood, her posture still proud, despite her circumstances. As the chains fell to the ground, she looked at him, and for the first time, he saw a flicker of something in her eyes. Hope. The man turned to leave, but he felt her eyes on him. She was free now, and so was he. He didn't know what would come next, but he knew one thing. He had made the right choice, and as he walked away, he couldn't help but wonder what kind of person she was. The woman he had just freed. She was no longer a slave, but what would she become? Unlikely connection. The days that followed were filled with silence and tension. The man had done what he thought was right, releasing the alien woman from her chains. But now, he didn't know what to do with her. She was no longer a slave, but she was also not entirely free. She had no place to go, no way to survive on her own, in a world so different from her own. He found her wandering the halls of the barracks, her eyes wide with confusion and fear. She looked lost, unsure of where she was supposed to go now that she had been set free. The man had offered her his quarters, a place where she could stay while she figured out her next move. But she hadn't said much, just a quiet thank you before walking away. He wasn't sure if she even trusted him. After all, he had been the one to take her chains off. But that didn't mean she saw him as an ally. One evening, after another long day of trying to avoid each other, the man found her sitting alone in the courtyard. She was staring at the sky, the stars reflected in her wide, searching eyes. He approached, slowly, unsure if she wanted to be left alone. But when she saw him, she didn't turn away. Instead, she met his gaze, her face unreadable. "You don't have to thank me," he said softly, taking a seat beside her. "You're free now." "But I know it's not that simple." She nodded, but said nothing. She didn't seem angry, just distant. as if the chains had been removed from her body, but they still lingered in her mind. I don't know what's going to happen next, he continued, but I won't make you stay, if you don't want to. She finally looked at him, her eyes narrowing slightly. You freed me, she said, her voice low and steady. But you don't know what that means to me. You don't understand what it means to be free. To not have someone else control your every move, your every thought. The man was taken aback. He hadn't thought about what it really meant for her to be free. Not in the way she did. I can't imagine, he admitted, but I know what it's like to be a soldier. To be told where to go, what to do, but this is different. I know that. For a moment, they were silent. The weight of her words hanging between them. He had given her freedom, but it wasn't as simple as that. She had been stripped of her dignity, her rights, and now, she was left with nothing but the uncertain future. I don't know who you are, she said suddenly, breaking the silence, but I do know this: you saved my life, and for that, I'm grateful. Her words were quiet, but there was something in the way she said them that told him she wasn't just speaking out of obligation. He didn't know what to say in response. All he could think about was how much he had underestimated her, how much he had thought he was helping her by simply setting her free, but freedom, as it turned out, was a much bigger challenge than he realized. Over the next few days, the man and the alien woman began to speak more, but their conversations were awkward at first, filled with pauses and unspoken thoughts. The man learned that her name was Alana, and that she came from a planet far across the galaxy, where her people were enslaved by a different empire. She had been captured and brought to this world as a prisoner, sold as a slave to the highest bidder. Ilara spoke little of her past, but the man could see the pain in her eyes when she did. He understood that she had suffered, and he couldn't begin to imagine what that had done to her. But as the days went by, he saw something else, too: her strength, her spirit. She was not a broken woman. Even after everything that had happened to her, one evening, as they shared a quiet meal, the man looked at her and said, "You don't have to stay here, Ilara. If you want to leave, I'll help you." Ilara met his gaze, her eyes softening for the first time. "I'm not sure where I would go," she said quietly. "But I'm not running anymore. Not from you, not from my past." The man nodded, understanding more than he had before. The journey ahead of them was unknown, and the road would be difficult, but one thing was certain: they would walk it together. A new beginning. As the days passed, the bond between the man and Ilara grew stronger. They spent more time together, talking about their lives, their experiences, and the worlds they came from. Ilara shared bits and pieces of her past, of the pain she had endured, but also the strength that had kept her alive. The man listened, never interrupting, always absorbing her words. It became clear to him that she was not just a victim. She was a warrior in her own right. The man found himself increasingly drawn to her, not just because of her beauty, which was undeniable, but because of her spirit. She had endured so much. And yet, she still stood tall, never asking for pity, never showing weakness. Her strength captivated him, and in a way, it inspired him to become a better man, to be someone who would protect her, someone who could help her find peace. One evening, as they sat by the fire, the conversation turned to what the future would hold. Ilara's eyes were distant as she stared into the flames. "I don't know where I belong anymore," she said softly. "I was a slave for so long. I don't know how to be anything else." The man looked at her, his heart aching for the pain in her voice. "You don't have to be a slave anymore," he said, his voice steady. "You're free now, Ilara. You can be whoever you want to be. You don't have to answer to anyone, not anymore." Ilara turned to look at him, her eyes searching his face for something. It was a moment of silence, one that felt like it stretched on forever. Finally, she spoke. "What do you expect from me?" she asked quietly. "What do you want from me?" The man was caught off guard by the question. It was one he hadn't thought of before, but as he looked at her, he realized that what he wanted was simple. He wanted her to be free, truly free. He wanted to give her the life she deserved. A life where she didn't have to worry about being chained again. "I don't want anything from you," he said, his voice calm. "I just want you to be happy. I want you to be able to live your life on your terms, without fear, without chains." For the first time, Ilara smiled, a small, genuine smile that made the man's heart swell. It was the first time he had seen her smile without it being forced, without the weight of her past pulling her down. It was a smile that said she believed him, believed that she could have a future beyond the pain she had known. Over the next few weeks, the man and Ilara continued to grow closer. The world outside was still harsh and unforgiving, but together, they began to carve out a life for themselves. They worked side by side, learning from each other, growing stronger with each passing day. The man showed Ilara the ways of the human world, while she taught him about the ways of her people. Their differences no longer seemed so important. It was the shared understanding between them, the respect and care, that made their connection special. One evening, as they sat by the fire once again, the man looked at her with a new kind of certainty in his eyes. "Ilara," he began, his voice quiet but firm, "I don't know what the future holds for us, but I know one thing. I don't want to live without you. You're not just a slave to me. You're not just a woman who was freed. You are someone who has changed my life. Someone who has shown me a world I never knew existed." Ilara's eyes softened, and for a moment, the world seemed to disappear around them. It was just the two of them, sitting by the fire, surrounded by the warmth they had built together. She looked at him, her voice barely a whisper. "And I don't want to live without you either," she said. "You gave me my freedom. But more than that, you gave me a choice, a chance to start again. I never thought that would be possible, but now, I see it. I see a future, and it's with you." The man reached out, taking her hand in his, feeling the warmth of her touch. "Then, let's start that future," he said, "together." And in that moment, with the stars shining above them, and the fire crackling between them, they both knew that this was just the beginning. Together, they would face whatever the future brought. And whatever challenges lay ahead, they would meet them side by side.